Hey everyone, my name is Richard, and tonight I am going to tell you two strange stories from the highways of America. Both are about truck drivers, men who spend their nights on lonely roads where sometimes the road looks back at you. So sit back, turn off the lights, and listen carefully, because these stories might just make you think twice before your next drive. Tonight's first story comes from the lonely highways of New York. A truck driver named Jason Houston was on a long night haul through the forest roads when he saw something. A man with long hair, holding a hatchet, staring at him in silence. Jason thought it was just his tired eyes playing tricks. But later that night, around 2 a.m., he discovered the truth. Written right into the dirt beside his truck, Jason Houston had been driving all night. The forest highway was almost empty, the kind of stretch where even the radio signal fades and only the sound of tires and the low growl of the engine keep you company. He had been on the road for 14 hours straight, hauling refrigerated cargo from Denver to Portland. It was a lonely route, cutting through the edge of Washington's thick pine forests. The sky above was dark, the stars hiding behind restless clouds. Jason had always liked driving through the night. It gave him peace. But that night, something felt different. The trees along the roadside seemed darker than usual. Their shadows reached toward the pavement like long fingers. His headlights cut through the fog in narrow beams, and the forest on both sides looked alive. Breathing, watching. He tried to shake it off. Just another long night, he muttered to himself. But deep down, he felt a weight in his chest, like someone was sitting in the passenger seat. Silent, unseen. He checked the clock. It was a little past midnight. About 20 minutes later, as he rounded a bend near a small service road, something caught his eye. There, just ahead on the shoulder, stood a man. Jason slowed the truck. The man was facing the forest, not the road. He had long, unkempt hair that reached his shoulders, a tattered flannel shirt, and jeans that looked soaked at the bottom. In his right hand he held a hatchet. Jason's heart skipped. The man did not move. He did not wave or ask for help. He just stood there, perfectly still, like a statue carved out of shadow. Jason rolled past slowly, keeping his eyes on him through the side mirror. And that was when the man turned his head. Their eyes met. For a single second, there was no expression on the stranger's face, only emptiness. Then, without warning, he turned and walked into the forest, vanishing between the trees. Jason kept driving. For the next few miles, he tried to convince himself it was nothing. Maybe a camper, maybe a hunter, but that uneasy feeling did not leave him. By the time he reached the next town, it was close to 2 a.m. His stomach growled, and his eyes burned from exhaustion. He spotted a small roadside diner with a flickering neon sign that read, Miller's Rest Stop. Jason pulled in. The gravel crunched under his tires as he parked beside the empty lot. The place looked old. A few cabins in the back, a small cafe up front, and a gas pump that had probably not worked in years. He stepped out of the truck, stretching his stiff shoulders. The night air was cold, carrying the faint smell of rain and pine. Inside the diner was quiet. Only one waitress was there. A middle-aged woman reading a magazine behind the counter. She looked up and smiled faintly. "Kitchen's still open," she said. "What can I get you?" Jason ordered black coffee and a sandwich. He sat by the window, watching the forest line in the distance. The lights from the diner reflected faintly on his truck, parked just outside. He tried not to think about the man with the hatchet, but the image kept replaying. The hair, the stillness, the stare. The waitress brought his food and poured his coffee. "Rough night?" she asked casually. "Something like that," Jason said. "Saw a guy back on the forest road." Looked like he had an axe. She frowned. An axe? Out there? You sure? Jason nodded slowly. Yeah, he was just standing by the trees. She shook her head. You should not stop for anyone around those woods. Folks say people disappear in there sometimes. Jason gave a short, tired laugh. Disappear? Like ghost stories? She shrugged. Maybe. Or maybe it is just the forest taking back what belongs to it. Jason did not respond. He finished his coffee, paid the bill, and stepped outside again. The parking lot was silent. The air had grown colder, and mist curled along the ground like thin smoke. His truck stood under the dim streetlight, its chrome grille reflecting pale yellow light. Jason felt a chill as he approached. Something looked different. He stopped. There in front of the driver's door, the ground was disturbed. Loose dirt, freshly moved, and sticking straight up from it was a hatchet. The same one. The wooden handle was dark, damp, and slightly cracked. The metal head was dull, but unmistakably the same. Jason's breath caught in his throat. He stepped closer, his boots crunching on the gravel. His heart hammered in his chest. He knelt to get a better look. And that was when he saw it. Just below the handle, carved roughly into the dirt, were the words, "You took my spot." Jason froze. The sound of the forest filled his ears. The whisper of wind, the creak of trees, the distant call of an owl. But somewhere beyond it, faint and almost human, he thought he heard breathing. Slow, steady, close. He stood up, scanning the darkness. The diner's lights flickered behind him, casting long shadows across the lot. The forest stood silent across the road, still, heavy, waiting. Jason took a cautious step back toward the diner, then another. He did not want to turn his back on the trees, and just as he reached the door, a sudden gust of wind swept across the lot. The hatchet shifted, tilting slightly, as if something had just touched it. Jason's pulse roared in his ears. He backed into the diner, locking the door behind him. The waitress looked up, startled. "Everything all right?" Jason's voice trembled. "Someone's out there. The man from the woods." She walked to the window, peering out. But by the time she looked, the lot was empty. The hatchet was gone. Jason's truck stood silent under the light, and the disturbed earth had been smoothed flat, as if no one had ever touched it. The waitress turned to him. "There is no one there." Jason stepped closer to the window. His hands were shaking. But she was right. The spot was clean. Still, in the reflection of the glass, just faintly, Jason thought he saw movement behind his truck. A dark figure watching. Outside, the forest whispered again. And somewhere in the darkness, a voice, low, calm, almost gentle, said, "You took my spot." That was the first story. Jason Houston and the mysterious hatchet. But now I have another story for you. This one takes us far from the forests, deep into southern Arizona, where the Sonoran Desert stretches endlessly under the sun. It is the story of a truck driver named Ryan, who always carried his DSLR camera wherever he went. One day, while driving through the desert, he stopped to take pictures and found something chained to an old tree. Something that should have never been captured on film. Ryan had always loved two things in life: the open road and his camera. By profession, he was a long-haul truck driver. But deep down, he was a photographer at heart. Every stretch of asphalt, every changing sky, every forgotten corner of America. He tried to capture it all through the lens of his old DSLR. That camera had traveled with him across 30 states. It had seen storms, sunsets, and countless miles of loneliness. On that particular day, Ryan was hauling cargo through southern Arizona, across the dry emptiness of the Sonoran Desert. The highway stretched endlessly under a white sun, the landscape shimmering with heat. The sand seemed to breathe with the wind, whispering against the sides of his truck as he drove. Cacti stood like sentinels, motionless and ancient. The radio had long lost signal. There was nothing but silence, a deep, humming quiet that only the desert could hold. It was late afternoon when Ryan decided to pull over for a break. The road ahead was empty for miles, and he knew there would not be a rest stop anytime soon. He slowed the truck beside a small dry ridge and cut the engine. The sudden silence was heavy. Even the wind seemed to stop for a moment. Ryan grabbed his DSLR from the passenger seat and stepped outside. His boots sank slightly into the sand as he stretched his back and looked around. The desert was endless. No sign of life, not even a bird. Only the golden horizon and the sound of wind brushing over the dunes. He lifted his camera and started shooting. The ridges, the scattered rocks, the faded highway line trailing into nowhere. Then something caught his eye. About 100 feet from the road stood an old, leafless tree, twisted and gray, half buried in sand. Its bark looked cracked like burnt earth, but what drew Ryan's attention was something strange around its trunk. Chains. Rusty, heavy chains were wrapped tightly around the lower part of the tree, tangled and old, half sunken into the wood. The metal glimmered faintly under the afternoon light. Ryan frowned. There was no reason for chains to be out there. No farm, no fence, no houses for miles. He slung his camera strap around his neck and started walking toward it. As he approached, the air felt different, stiller, heavier. The wind that had been blowing moments ago died completely. The only sound was the soft crunch of his boots on sand. The chains clinked faintly, moved slightly by the breeze that barely touched them. Ryan raised his camera and zoomed in. Through the lens, the details became sharper. The way the chains had grown into the wood, the rust flakes catching the light, the deep grooves carved into the bark beneath them. He adjusted the focus and clicked. Shutter sound. He took another shot, moving a little closer this time. The camera beeped softly as it processed the image. Then Ryan noticed something else. One section of the chain, near the base of the trunk, seemed newer. Less rust, more shine, as if someone had touched it recently. He felt a chill crawl up his neck, even under the blazing desert heat. Probably just an old ranch boundary, he murmured. But even as he said it, he knew it made no sense. There was no sign of a ranch anywhere near. He took another photo, this time a close-up of the chains. The camera clicked again. Ryan leaned in slightly, peering through the viewfinder to adjust the focus. And that was when he froze. Inside the frame, between the loops of the chains, something shifted. For half a second, it looked like a face. Pale, faint, pressed against the inside of the tree, as if trapped beneath the bark. The eyes seemed closed, the mouth slightly open, frozen in silence. Ryan blinked, his breath catching. He lowered the camera and looked up. The tree was empty. Nothing. Only the wind. Gentle. Dry. Whispering softly through the branches. He frowned, lifted the camera again, and looked through the lens once more. The face was gone. He waited, holding his breath. The chains rattled lightly. A small gust of wind passed through them, making a faint metallic sound. Almost like a sigh. Ryan stepped back, uneasy now. He checked the photo on the camera screen. The shot showed the tree clearly. Every crack, every link of the chain. But no face, not even a blur. He scrolled back and forth between frames. Nothing. The air felt colder somehow, though the sun still blazed above him. Ryan wiped sweat from his forehead and looked around. The desert was silent again. Not a sound, not a movement. It felt like the world was holding its breath. He decided to take one last shot before heading back. He steadied his hands, focused the lens, and clicked. The camera flashed briefly. Then he heard it, a sound he could not place at first. The chains were moving, slowly, rhythmically. He stepped back, his heart pounding. The air was still, but the chains swayed gently against the trunk, as if something inside the tree had shifted. Ryan lifted his camera again, zooming in with trembling fingers. Through the viewfinder, the chains seemed tighter now, drawn inward slightly, as though being pulled from the other side. And just for a moment, no longer than a blink, the face appeared again. Closer. Pressed against the wood, eyes open this time, staring directly at him. Ryan's breath hitched. He jerked the camera down, but there was nothing there. Just the dry bark and the endless wind. His pulse thundered in his ears. He backed away slowly, his boots crunching over the sand. He did not know why, but he could not shake the feeling that the ground beneath him was no longer solid, that the silence around him was not empty at all. He turned and began walking quickly toward the truck. Every step felt heavier than the last. The chains clinked again, behind him, faint but clear, like footsteps matching his own. Ryan reached the truck, his hands shaking as he climbed into the cab. He locked the door and stared through the windshield toward the tree. It stood there, still and lifeless. He reached for the camera, scrolling through the images again. The photos were fine. Empty, silent, harmless. Except the last one. He leaned closer, squinting at the small screen. In the corner of the frame, barely visible between the shadows of the branches, was something that looked like a hand. Thin, pale, resting against the inside of the tree. Ryan exhaled shakily. "It must be a trick of the light," he said softly, trying to convince himself. But his voice sounded hollow. He started the engine. The desert air swirled dust around the truck tires. As he pulled away, the chains rattled one last time, faint but distinct, carried on the wind like a whisper. And for a brief second, through the side mirror, Ryan thought he saw something standing beside the tree. A shadow, watching. He blinked, and it was gone. The desert stretched on endlessly before him. But the sound of those rattling chains stayed in his ears long after the road disappeared behind him. If both of these stories gave you chills, then make sure to like, share, and subscribe for more real truck driver tales from the roads of America. Because out there, in the dark highways and silent deserts, not every story ends when the engine stops.